Okay, welcome to Artcasters, episode 321. We've got artist Chase Tokutaro today. I even practiced beforehand and still messed it up. I'm so bad at names. Uh, Chase, it's good to have you on. We're excited. I saw bits and pieces of the live stream that you were doing with on Gary's channel. That was fun. So we're excited to have you on. Should we do a quick 10-second roundtable here on intros? So I'm Corey Kerr. You can find my stuff at coreykerr.com. Josh, real quick, where can we find your stuff?
You can find my stuff at bookstores. So pre-order my graphic novel Jacob's Apartment, um, which is a slice of life story, doomed romance in the vein of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and Ghost World. And if you're into indie comics and stuff like that, definitely check that out and pre-order it. You can also buy my current book, Two Stories, on Amazon right now. And then also, if you're in the Toronto or New York area around the end of June, I'll be at TCAF signing books and selling books. So stop by and say hi. And then there's other events as well coming up for the release of Jacob's Apartment from Graphic Mundi. So make sure you're checking out my website and the live events section. And that way you can kind of see if there's a place near you that I'll be doing a signing at. And if there's anywhere you want me to sign at, reach out to me and let me know. All right, sorry.
So Josh fails at a quick introduction.
Exactly. I
Scott,
fail at a quick anything.
Scott, quick introduction. Where can we find your stuff?
Yeah, I am in stores too, literally, or I will be. You can find me for Free Comic Book Day at Surprise Comics in Surprise, Arizona. If you want to come and meet with me and get a sketch or whatever, I will be there, which is not this weekend, but the following weekend is Free Comic Book Day, so I'll be there. You can also find my work at circworks.com, where I've got my comic book Young and the Dead is a kids versus zombie adventure story. I think Goonies meets Night of the Living Dead. So if you're into fun, nostalgic 80s adventure movies, then you'll probably be into a fun, nostalgia 80s adventure comic. And that's what Young and the Dead is. And you can also find me on YouTube. Just search Circworks on YouTube. You'll find my channel. And I've got a series called Making Comics 101. And it will take you every step of the process of making comics, everything from coming up with your idea all the way to printing, publishing, and every step in between. And that's how you do an intro, Josh.
I tried. So Chase, feel like you can take as much time as you like. We'll jump into the topic after your introduction, but tell us where we can find your artwork and any areas online that we can kind of check you out.
Okay, hopefully I don't fail my own introduction, but it's pretty basic. It's just Chase Tokutaro Art, all collectively in one sort of word, in Instagram, and that's the same for my email address over at Gmail if you want to inquire about, I don't know, any questions, any potential commissions, or even my little zine that you can Venmo and PayPal me for less than a cup of coffee to have mailed to you, signed and everything. And it kind of fits into today's subject.
Yeah. So do you want to
transition?
Do you want to kind of kick off today's subject? I think it's going to be a really interesting one because I know lots of us are all over the issue on different sides. And so, what are we talking about today, Chase?
Yes, I think the invitation, for coming onto the show was sort of brought on by my very unique endeavor, in that this isn't sort of a simple pursuit of putting out content, but rather making this big long-term property, this kind of artistic statement, so to speak, with a book compared to a zine or a couple of images that are just sort of distributed out there, like how most creators typically start out. I'm going for a very unusual route, and that might be what provoked Corey to sort of invite me onto this show to speak.
Yeah, so I think, and I was saying in the description, I think conventional wisdom kind of dictates that when you're just starting into comics or just starting into doing something, that you should take like kind of small, tiny steps. You know, maybe do a mini comic, maybe do just a one issue thing or something like that. And even I've heard people say, and with good reason, you know, don't do some massive 300-page epic and things like that. And I think there's a lot of good reasons for that, but also, Chase, you and I know Gary Hodges and myself and others. I don't know, Josh, if your first comics were shorter or longer, but we've all kind of like jumped in. We're just like, let's do this big giant thing. And I think there's some value to kind of both of those. And I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of discuss kind of the merits of those. And so, yeah. So what have you found as you've kind of started into this larger project? I know on Gary's show, you were holding up this giant tome of paper that you've like written a novel on recently, and then you've got pages drawn and things like that. So what are some of the upsides, do you think, or downsides that you've encountered?
Well, firstly, in terms of the production of the book that I'm writing, it has been a very unique process of self-discovery, because when you write an entire full-length story, you know, with all these characters that have these, you know, arcs that are developed and these intertwining plot lines that kind of carry a theme or undercurrent out, it's like you're processing art in a manner that's very different from, say, you know, a bite-sized one-shot issue. And short form projects, I found from my first few years starting out as a artist in the Comic-Con venues and whatnot, offered sort of a education in practical measurability and, you know, understanding the maintenance that goes into testing, you know, the technical capabilities of drawing a comic, printing it out, exhibiting it, promoting it to, you know, customers and clients, and sort of rinsing and repeating the pattern. And I think the repetition that came with selling prints at Comic Cons and having to deal with, you know, too much stock or not enough sales or undesirable, you know, responses or encounters, that sort of made me reconsider the trajectory that I was going towards as an artist. And that ultimately made me desire what writers go through, because writing has to kind of communicate on a whole different level compared to, you know, art like tchotchkes or trinkets or prints and whatnot. There's just sort of a more multi-faceted, multi-layered dynamic going on right there with making a graphic novel versus, say, you know, a zine with a couple cool drawings, you know, for beginning out.
Yeah, that's good. I when I was doing it, I decided to kind of really take drawing seriously and learn how to draw, and I chose a long comic because I knew that to learn anything, you've got to get in and do it a lot. And so I think had I chosen something that was a 4-pager or a 9-pager or something, I don't think I would have gotten the same thing out of it. And so I got about 60 pages into this thing, you know, full color and inks and pencils and lettering and everything. And I mean, that's how I learned how to draw is to do kind of the first chapter of that book. I don't know, Josh, what do you think? Where do you land on the shorter projects versus longer projects?
I think it depends. I mean, I know Chase. I don't want to put you on notice or anything, but how old are you? Out of curiosity, do you mind sharing?
Oh, certainly. I'm the same age as Ian Curtis. I'm 23.
Okay, that's good. That's a
And
good age to be.
yeah,
Don't go
finished
out
my
like
script
Ian Curtis,
when
okay?
I was 21. Yeah.
But yeah. So like I think Chase. I think you're a little quicker to like kind of getting or taking it more seriously than I think I was. I had this just crippling fear up until like probably my mid-20s of even taking on comics, because I felt like I needed to learn all sorts of things about art. And so I was like pursuing an art degree. And then after that, toward the end of pursuing my art degree, I finally was like, oh, I should actually like, so I was probably about 28 when I made my like first serious crack at comics. And that was like a 24 pager. But from there, I actually just went straight into making a graphic novel. And then from there, made another graphic novel, and now we're here. So it's like, I kind of feel like, and I did a bunch of like short stuff for like anthologies and stuff too along the way. But I feel like, honestly, I think the earlier you can kind of start on those big epic projects, and I think this ties into stuff we've talked about on the show, where I don't think ideas are as precious as we make them. And so I feel like, let's say you do your first big epic novel and it's not as good as something you could do 10 years from now. Well, that's great. 10 years from now, you can make another big epic graphic novel, right? There's nothing like marrying you to like one specific thing. And so to me, I feel like, artists, including myself, I think, the younger you can kind of just latch onto the idea of like not waiting and doing your vision, like whatever your vision is. So if you're in a band and you want to make an album, make an album. Like if you're, a cartoonist and you want to do a short comic, do a short comic. If you have a dream of doing these big epic graphic novels, like the longer you wait, the less time you're going to have to actually fully realize that. So I feel like, I don't know, I'm mixed on it. I've seen the value of like the advice of making shorter work, but I tend to be on the side of like, if you want to do it, you should try to do it with all your might. And then if you're going to fail at it, fail epically. And if you're going to succeed at it, at least you're giving yourself a shot at possibly succeeding at it, rather than avoiding it or prolonging it or waiting. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh,
I tend
totally.
to fall on that side, although I can see the merits, and I gauge it based on who I'm talking to. Like with Chase, I would be like, yeah, continue. I've met people Chase's age who maybe didn't have as much inspiration to do the thing, and in those, or more second guessing and doubt. And in those cases, I'd probably be more on the line of like what Corey, what you tend to advise, or Scott tends to advise.
Well, I'm not. I like longer projects quite a bit. I don't advise against them. The one benefit that I think shorter projects have, I think, and this really, well, two benefits really, is some people haven't gotten used to that feeling of succeeding at something when you finish it.
Yeah.
And a multi-year project can be, I think it can kill artists if they're not careful with it, because you just never get that success of like, I did that, I'm able to do it, I could do it again. And it's kind of like, at this point in time, Josh, I don't think anybody's going to question your ability to like start and finish a book. You know what I mean? And then I think that includes you. But I do think that there are people out there that, for whatever reason, and I don't think it has to be artistic, I think it could be anything, they're just not used to finishing things. And so people will start stuff and they never finish it. And so it's kind of like, I almost want to get people addicted to that feeling of like finishing. Like, yes. Right now I'm in the middle of a project and I've done everything that I can do. And there's like one live action bit that we need to shoot. And we've gotten rained out like 2 weeks in a row. It is driving me insane. Like I literally am like going nuts. And it's because I've realized that like I am just used to kind of what I think is kind of an uncommon thing. Like when I start stuff, I'm going to finish it. Like I'm going to get it done and I'm going to knock it out and we're going to move on to the next thing. And I don't see that as a common thing. So I don't know. It's kind of that's one of the big ones. The other one is if you do smaller stuff, you get to do lots of different things. And that's kind of That's kind of where I like it. I don't know, Scott, where are you at? Because I know you've given, I know
Yeah.
you've given kind of both pieces of advice.
Right. So, I mean, I've said this a number of times, but my number one bit of advice, and if you watch my videos, anytime I'm talking about starting a comic, I always say start small. And I definitely stand by that. But, having said that, the caveat is there are exceptions to every rule, and Chase is that exception. But for you to think, if you're probably Chase's age, you're just getting the comics, for you to think that you're like Chase, you're probably not. But you gotta, I guess you kind of have to know yourself, and it sounds like Chase is pretty meticulous. No, I can't pronounce the word.
Meticulous.
Meticulous, yes, about kind of figuring out what he was capable of and what he could do. He kind of tested the waters a little bit first, so it's not necessarily his first project, but it's right. So I think he trusts himself enough. So, and obviously, you judge by, the stream that I first saw Chase on. That's the whole reason why I said, oh, we got to get him on the Artcasters, because he is that exception to the rule. And it really brings up this topic that yes, I still stand by the fact that I say always, if it's kind of your first project, you're just getting into it, start small, because of all the reasons that were mentioned, that sense of accomplishment. If you start a project, and if it's like a project that's going to take you 2 or 3 years, you don't get that sense of accomplishment necessarily. I mean, you can break it up. That's kind of what I do. That's the main reason why I do single issues of my comic instead of a graphic novel, is to have the benchmarks along the way and those accomplishments. And I can say, oh, I completed an issue. Now I get to move on to the next one. But if you can, I guess, kind of do what Chase is doing, where if you can celebrate every single page you do, and it's one step closer, it's just it's really a mindset. And I don't think a lot of people really think too much about that before they just dive in, because it's kind of like, how a lot of people's first albums, like I'm talking music, are like usually their best, because they've their whole life they've been kind of planning this, writing songs and everything like that, getting and putting together this great album. So when they have their sophomore album, they probably got maybe a year to write new material and do all that stuff, and it just a lot of times falls flat.
Yeah, they aren't able to road test it for like 10 years,
right?
Like the first album.
So a lot of, I think, younger or first-time creators, they've got all these ideas and they want to put them. They want to put them in practice. And to me, it's kind of like two things, like kind of what Josh said, that you could do that, and also you're learning along the way too. And your epic may not be as epic as you want, because you're still learning along the way. Now, doing a comic like that, you're going to learn a lot. So there's that aspect of it. But also, maybe take that epic, if, for instance, if you go back to the music analogy, if you were to not take all your best material, because you probably want to do that because you may have one chance at it. You put your album out, if it's not any good, you may not get another chance. But on the flip side, if you were to take not all your best material, but put some of that off to the side and just focus on some of that, and then you have some great material left over for that second album. I think putting that big project that you've got these grandiose expectations for, and that maybe your second or third project you work on, while you just do like just a basic idea. And I kind of like Young and the Dead. My comic was kind of like that. It started off as just a simple idea for this mini comic challenge that I was involved in. And so I was like, well, what's the simplest, something simple that I can do that isn't going to really require a lot of, concepting and all this stuff. And so I go, oh, kids fighting zombies. I mean, it's basic. I mean, I could do that in a real quick 8-page story. Then once I started getting into it, then it did become a larger idea. But again, I kind of broke that up, and I just the main thing was just, okay, I'll do this first issue, got that done. And then once you hold that in your hand, like, okay, now I'm ready to do the next one. So to make a long story short, just, I still stand by my advice that if you're first starting off, start small. But again, there are exceptions, and I would never, if you're dead set on, no, I'm really want to take on this big project, then I would never say, oh, yeah, just absolutely don't do that. I love to be proven wrong. And if I had known Chase back when we were starting off, I probably would give him the same advice, and he probably would have said, yeah, I'm just going to do it anyway. And then looking back at what he's got now, I see it and I'm like, okay, you proved me wrong. And I like that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Chase, you're going to have to jump in and talk over us because all three of us are.
We'll just keep going.
Are long-winded, but I want to get Chase. Chase, what are you thinking here? Why did you choose? I mean, I know that you were kind of like, you kind of felt like you wanted to do something longer. What do you think was a big driving factor of some of those decisions? Because you were doing the stuff for cons, and that you felt like a desire to kind of like do something weightier.
Yeah, the discussion you brought up had a lot of points of both kind of contrasting and also sort of highlighting my goals with pursuing a full-length graphic novel. And I think with starting out with short-form projects, the one advantage there is the margin of expectations is very low. Like the reception has an immediacy to it if you have, for example, like an Ashcan zine, for a first time released by a publication company that, me and my boss set up. Like, there is a sort of advantage to the small scale form of learning versus the gradual, which is almost sort of monastic, in terms of breadth and overall proportions. And I think the number one obstacle with pursuing a full-length book for a first-time cartoonist or a newcomer is like overcoming the barrier of expectations, and avoiding the pitfall of, falling into the cycle of overthinking, where I might doubt myself as to whether or not I'll get, page 1 of chapter 1 done, and then page 2 afterwards done, and so on. Like, there's just sort of a you have to shut off the brain at a certain point and just like go right into it. And I mentioned like I was struggling with procrastination on the last stream I had with Gary. Well, I'm sort of in that dilemma right now, and it's almost a philosophical mode I'm entering on top of a professional one at that. I don't know if you had that same sort of experience, Joshua, when you were starting out the first few pages of your debut graphic novel.
Yeah, I mean, so my first comic was really short. It was like 24 pages, but it took me like a year, and which is kind of insane in retrospect. But at the time, that was like the quickest I could do it. And the whole time I was doing it, I was learning the process of comics. So it was like anybody. Now keep in mind, I had made like zines and like photocopied comics and stuff like that up until then, but I don't really consider those like comics. I don't know if that makes sense. It's like I didn't really know art as well as I did like by that first one, but that whole time I was just riddled with self-doubt and questioning, and also exploring and learning and being like, oh, okay, this is how my workflow is, because that's actually one big point to like back what Scott's talking about. One of the advantages starting on smaller projects is you still get on larger projects, but with smaller projects, you can kind of work in multiple styles or on short stories, and you can try different techniques until you land on the one that works. And with comics, there's so much organization in the process. I think that's why people who do comics end up getting addicted to it, because the second you figure out like, oh, paneling, then you start getting into more dynamic paneling, or you start getting into how do you do text bubbles well, or how do you keep a page flow like working, and more, and then the whole time you have all the considerations of an illustration, but a sequential illustration, right? So you're like, I have characters on the left and right, and I can't cross the line of action, and like it just gets so like the second you have one challenge solved, there's a new one, and I don't think anyone in their lifetime will master comics, and I think that's why it's so interesting. So for me, that was probably most of my self-doubt, was like figuring out my process, figuring out the medium I like to work in, figuring out the page size that I wanted to do. And then the graphic novel that I did, I had done a lot of, the whole time I've been doing that, I was doing art professionally, which helped. Gary in the chats was mentioning that about his own experience too. So you do gain a little bit of confidence when you're doing art, for money on a time limit. And, you get weird assignments where somebody's just like, hey, draw the Coliseum full of people, and it's due like tomorrow morning. And you're like, oh crap, I've never drawn a Coliseum or a large group of people that size, but I have to. Okay, I guess I do that now. So that gives you a certain mode of confidence going into it. But there was a lot of self-doubt throughout that whole first book, and especially the graphic novel, and especially when I got to like the midpoint, and I was a couple years into it, and I was like still saying no to friends when they were going out, and I'm like, I don't know, maybe I should just like do what other people do, just like go to work and then like party or whatever, and not just like spend all this time, a lot of that kind of riddled with self-doubt type stuff. And then second guessing the story and whether it was any good, and like all of that stuff. And all of that goes away on your second. Well, most of that type of stuff goes away on your second, partially because you learn the weaknesses through the process of a longer project like that. You're going to learn how to write better. So by the time you work on a second project, you've hopefully refined your process. And you're going to learn so much about the process. But it is a weird thing where you have a lot of philosophical quandaries and dilemmas. A lot of like that just weight of the sheer time that it takes to do comics, like weighing you down, because you're like, again, like not everybody feels obligated to be creative. And so that's where actually something Jim was saying in the chats earlier too, where Jim was saying like one of the pieces of advice he gives young artists is like, really be careful who you're hanging out with, because if you're surrounded with people who just like all they do is party, then like you're probably gonna get influenced by that. It might be hard to kind of like stick to the art table or whatever. So it is important to kind of like try to find friends that that either are interested in creating or are equally invested in you creating. I think that's helpful. So, and generally like good friends will be understanding of that. Like, I still have non-creative friends that when I'm like this year, I literally have no weekends. And I had to tell a lot of friends that, most of them are pretty understanding of that, But I still think you should take on the long projects and see it through. And here's the catch. That's the one catch to that piece of advice. If you aren't able to commit to doing it fully, then do exactly what Scott's first piece of advice is. Like if you're not the type of person who's going to be like, I am going to walk from here to like the other side of the state. And once you've decided it, once you've gotten the resources and the tools, that like, even if you're out of shape, you're going to do it. If you're that type of personality, then take on a graphic novel, right? If you're the type of personality that gets that feeling all the time, you get all the resources and tools, you start the walk and you get like maybe just outside of the city limits and you're like, I don't know, this plan wasn't so good, I think I'll turn back. Then start with the smaller projects, kind of like a runner starting with like a smaller run. because it's a marathon, and it's like, everyone admires somebody who finishes a marathon. It's, the one thing most people don't like, including the runners, is like having to give up, especially halfway or something. So I feel like I agree with Scott and I disagree with Scott. Like, I think Scott and I are in more agreement. Maybe we'll pit ourselves against each other for content here, but it's like, I think I'm actually in agreement with Scott, but also I don't want to be all cliche and like seize the day about things, but it is one of those things. If you feel called to do something in life, often waiting can be wise, but I think if you're able to back plan something, then starting now is not a bad point. I like, there are disadvantages to waiting too, because waiting a year can equally become like 10 years. And one last thing, and then I want to give it back to you. So in my own experience, that first comic was sort of a cathartic thing, because I had pushed off working on comics for years because of my perfectionism. So I would start like a page and I'd be like, this just isn't good enough. Or I'd start a script and be like, this just isn't good enough. When I learn more and like the magic thing happens. And the one thing that really just kicked that all out of my system, unfortunately, like in my late 20s, was that realization of like realizing like, holy crap, I'm in my late 20s. I wanted to be a cartoonist with like graphic novels done, and I haven't even finished a comic. So I was like, okay, well, that's the first thing. I have to finish a comic, and then I got to do a graphic novel. And no one's going to like come by and be like, hey, dude, you're ready. It's time. It's like, how these things get done is somebody sits down at an art table and goes, I'm going to do this. That's the big trick, Anyhow, sorry. That was a very long answer. Chase, you asked me a simple question. I'll go a day. I'll write a novel.
Again, I think where I think Josh and I do agree is that you really have to know your personality. If you're so stubborn, like you said, that if you're the kind of person, if you're the kind of person that puts your mind to something and delivers, then go for it. I don't know if a lot of younger people are like that, honestly. There's a few, but I don't know. I mean, I think because you're still, at least me, when I was like Chase's age, I wasn't so confident in whether I could pull something off that. Yeah.
No, neither was I.
Although I did think, there's also that overconfidence. It's kind of, I know there's also the overconfidence when you're younger. You think, oh, I'm just going to go out and to this convention and get picked up by Marvel, and I'm going to be drawing Marvel comics. And then a lot of times you're in for a rude awakening. So.
Yeah, there is something to that age, because I mean, when I was, I don't know, 20 years ago, I guess, I just thought I was invincible. I mean, physically invincible, spiritually invincible, mentally invincible, and so like I thought and actually did just accomplish anything that I wanted. I was like, sure, I have zero experience with this and no idea how to do it, but yeah, I could do it. And you just jump in and you do it. And I don't know. I do think there's some of that the benefit of that hubris of at least my youth, where it's like why not? Like, what's stopping me? That dude's a person. I'm a person. So we both are qualified. If he's able to finish something, I can finish something. Let's get in.
Yeah, and I think one of the big advantages to what Corey's talking about there too is like, I've heard very wealthy like businessmen give this advice to like kids who are interested in like starting their own businesses, and usually not comic businesses, right? But quite often they say to do it when you're young, because you can do a risk and you can still bounce back. Whereas like the older you get, like you start having kids, you start having family members, you have more obligations. And so the risks take on like all sorts of different weight. As like a young man's risk is a lot different. You have less stakes in the game. So like you can actually take bolder risks. And I think that would go for like a reason to like start, now rather than wait.
I mean, when I was when I was 23, I could fit everything that I needed on a small bungee corded sack in the back of my motorcycle. And so worst case scenario, I'll just live on the freeway for a little while. You know, I mean, that's like a significantly different situation when I'm 43, you know, and so, okay, I want to get to this question. So I'll let Chase have first at bat here. Kayla's got a great question here. Question for everyone. How do you get over that perfectionism? Just by cranking out short projects? Does it have to be short projects to get over kind of some perfectionism?
I think there is
Chase.
a dynamic of accumulating the subconscious level of commitment where you're just allowing productivity to be integrated in a breathable manner. You know, having that gradual mindset that just sort of negates temporary gratification and very much is sort of in a strong calibration with the long-term trajectory, you know, of achieving a lifelong goal. It's kind of similar to athletes where if they skip out on a workout for a day, they'll feel very bad and they'll almost have to, you know, double their efforts the next time. And they have to sort of, you know, go for progressive overload if they're, you know, getting stagnant in a particular range of exercises or a particular course that's not challenging their body to adapt anymore, and they have to, you know, work harder or work smarter. That's a whole other quandary in itself. So it's partly that mastery of adapting, you know, and overcoming the idea of discomfort or doubt and sort of, you know, almost embracing it to the point where it gets comfortable and they can gradually go from there. Because I kind of think, you know, having these creators with this experience, you know, inviting me on is wonderful because there is this, you know, creative inertia, the spiritual inertia that's, you know, going to eventually become momentum if I, you know, go right to drawing page one. So it's like this energy can finally be externalized through, you know, practical tasks that can yield results over time.
Yeah.
It's
I was
comparatively,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's comparatively more difficult to say writing. Like, I don't think authors have it nearly as hard as, you know, cartoonists do, you know, visualizing the stories on top of just, you know, cold, you know, nonstop text.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can go
I
for
was looking at somebody's work today with another colleague of mine, and you could tell that there was some raw talent, and you could tell that they were still kind of exploring, and you know there was a lot of misses, you know, but there was just an incredible amount of work. And so the thing about either a long form or a series of short form projects, I think if you put in just a ton of work over a long period of time, there's almost nothing bad that can happen with that. There's almost only benefits to that. Even if and that's where I kind of think, you know, whatever works for you. If you're going to do the thing, you know, and swing for the fences and do some 400 page, you know, comic or whatever, and you get 180 pages into that and flame out and you abandon it and it never happens again, you still have 180 pages under your belt, you know, and you're 180 pages ahead of where you were before, you know. Or if you want to spend a long time doing a bunch of short projects and stuff, all of that is going to be helpful. I do think, as somebody who's spent, you know, several years doing a lot of short projects, I do think there is some benefit to like having some weightier things that you can say, like, you know, like I can't say anything like Josh or Scott, you know, like, hey, this thing took me X number of years to do. Like I don't have like anything under my belt. And I do think there's something that adds a lot of credibility and weight to that. But as far as like getting over perfectionism or getting better as an artist, or, you know, increasing your ability of composition or anatomy or whatever, I think it's two things: time and focused effort. And so if you want to do time and focused effort on a bunch of small projects, that's great. You want to do time and focused effort on one big giant project, I think that's great. The one difference between those two things is on a longer project, especially like a comic book or something, you're going to have to draw the stuff that the story demands. Whereas on shorter stuff, sometimes you can get around that. Like I am a big proponent of something I started where it's like the sticker stint. Like if you're in a rut, like make 30 designs in 30 days, like design 30 t-shirts in 30 days, design 30 stickers in 30 days, like get a bunch of stuff done, get addicted to that finishing. The downside to that though is like, if you don't want to draw a hand, don't draw a hand. If you don't want to draw a human, everybody's a robot now. Or like you can totally avoid everything. But like Josh right now, if he's drawing a comic, and if it calls for like a Victorian single sailboat, he has to draw that. It's not like he can just be like, nope, it's a giant mech now. Like what the story calls for is what you have to draw. And those longer form projects are going to demand you to draw more things that you probably would avoid otherwise in the shorter stuff.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add with like how to kind of overcome perfectionism, for me, it was just leaning into the fact that I'm going to probably epically fail.
Yeah.
But deciding that if I'm going to fail, I'm going to do my best at failing. Like I'm gonna like fail so hard that like, so my first like serious comic, I not only was delusional, I was like, I'm going to get the Zarek grant, which like nobody got at that time, who was like a nobody in comics. Like most of the guys who even got it had been like self-publishing for years or whatever. And all the people who got it, like I'm probably the least known Zarek winner of the list. Like everybody on there, like a ton of people went on to like get Eisners and Harveys and stuff like that. And it's like, I was just delusional, but I also was like fully aware that I could send this thing out and it wouldn't happen. I was fully aware that I was going to give it my best shot so I wouldn't be embarrassed when I put it in front of people. Like, I had a high standard for it. But even looking back, like I can draw a billion times better. I was still learning how to balance my blacks. Like I used to use, I wanted to do like a Charles Burnsy thing, and I hadn't really perfected feathering yet. There's a lot of things that I can look back on that comic and kind of be like, yeah, I could do better. But I don't ever feel embarrassed about that comic. Like I'll sell that comic today at a con and feel fine about it because it's still the best I could do at the time. And I feel proud of it still, like years later.
Which is impressive in itself, because the one I did several years ago, I have buried it and taken every instance of it off of the internet so that it may never be found by anybody.
Well, I mean, I guess my point is like, I think if you accept the fact that you could fail and that's okay, like you're in a safe area where you can totally suck at it and that's okay. That's like the first process of drawing. If you're doing like life drawing and you're sitting at a session with like a live model and you start freaking out, it's what like life drawing teachers usually call like being tense or tight or whatever with your drawing. You're just being too tight or too noodly. And that's usually when you're drawing like this, like your hand will even be it. Your hand's going to be tense while you're drawing. And if you watch somebody who's a master at life drawing, they're going to like lay their lines pretty confidently, and then they might correct, but they're not often like their hand is flowing. It's moving. Yeah. It's very like precise, smart choices, but it's based on observation and kind of getting in that like Zen state, like that flow. Whereas the easiest way to disrupt flow is like, everyone in sports understands flow, right? Like when, and I sucked at sports, but I was okay at basketball when I was younger. The one thing that would completely assure that you're going to miss the shot is thinking you're going to miss the shot. Every time you think you're going to miss a shot, you just miss it. And there's these beautiful points when you're in a flow state on a court. Almost anyone who's at all tried sports and been okay at least one game, you'll know what it feels like. It's like I remember days where like I couldn't miss. Like I would just be like, yeah, that's going in. And like part of it was confidence and practice and all of those things. But there is like a weird mystical part to it that's like that flow kind of state. And I think artists need to be in that. That'll get you over the perfectionism for sure. The other thing is just realize you're mortal and you're going to die. that
Yeah.
helps too, right?
Yeah,
I'm not even
yeah.
joking. Like artists think about that. That's why artists create.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And
That they want to
I
leave
don't know.
behind a legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I remember a lot of people on Twitter, like comics Twitter, a little while ago were like, why do people do stuff, and why are you doing stuff if you're not trying to work for a publisher or whatever? And that was my answer, is like, when I'm dead, I want people to be like, there is a body of work that I've left behind. I think it's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry
Scott.
for dropping that bomb like last second, but I
No,
was like, yeah,
it's-
that's probably the
yeah.
bigger reason.
Yeah, no, I think about it all the time. Well, so for me to answer Kayla's question, I had to just make a conscious choice that I just had to stop being such a perfectionist, because my first comic, the one that never got done because I was a perfectionist, and I've shown this on my channel a number of times, but I've got versions of the first 5 pages done about 5 different times, redoing the same thing over and over again. And it did get better each time, I'm not going to lie, but the comic never got finished. And
Right.
when I started on Young and the Dead, I was like, okay, I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to stick with a different style. I mean, my process back then was, and this is all analog, but I would draw like a panel at a time, and then I'd scan it and reduce it, and like I'd take each panel and I compose it, and just so I got the perfect thing. And I mean, so I wouldn't even have a board, and I wouldn't sketch out every single panel like a layout. I would do each panel and I just so I could get the right panel. Once I got that sketch, then it was like a collage or something, and it was just, that process just took so long, and I was like, no, I need to get my 11 by 17 board out. I'm going to draw the whole thing on one board. I'm going to simplify my style, and I'm not going to worry as much if it's not perfect. And I just made that agreement with myself, and then I started, producing stuff. And then to the point where later, like the comic that I did for the anthology, the Werewolves and Unicorns anthology, that's really the only project I've done since, comics wise, besides sample pages and stuff I did for like Making Comics 101. But with that project, I said, well, it's only like a 4-pager. So I'm going to go back, and that one I was a little more meticulous with, and trying to get everything perfect, because I just wanted to make sure I could still do that just as an exercise. So, but again, only 4 pages, and all the stuff that I learned from simplifying and not being so precious on Young and the Dead, it sped up that process on that project. I was trying to be a little more perfect so much, just because I was able to let that go to begin with.
Yeah, that's Scott, I feel like a little bit, just tacking on to what you said, a little bit of the advantage of also the like not precious versus precious, the advantage of a long or short-term project, regardless, just finishing and committing, is that you can't not get better as long as you maintain a decent standard. And also, I think we should probably mention this too. Give yourself some semblance of a timeline. Although honestly, I do kind of feel like at first, I almost want to see creators not give themselves a timeline like early on. I want to see somebody do a page to the best of their ability, because I remember when I was teaching college, and I wonder if Corey, you have come across this. We had I had one assignment that was to create like a poster comic, kind of like a Chris Ware type thing, where it's just a single page story. It could be 100 panels, but it has to be a poster, right? It could be like however many panels you want. It had to have like a title treatment at the top. It had a minimum of panels. And I'd have students come in with stuff that just looked like they drew it it took them like maybe an hour. And that wasn't good enough. Like, it just didn't look good. And they'd have like months on the project. And I remember talking to students when they'd be like, oh man, I spent so long on this. And you're like, how long did you spend on it? And they're like, well, I mean, it's 20 panels, and I spent about an hour on it. And it's like, that's an hour is not, that is, you know, like for Jack Kirby in his like 80s, maybe that would be the right time frame. But you know, unless you have like thousands of comic pages under your belt, you should be spending 4 days on that page. Like 4 days, like I mean 24 or 12-hour days. Like, you know, that's what it should be at first. I feel like if you're doing it right. And if you do that, you're going to see that like 12. Now, you have to make a limit. So I wouldn't treat it like the Mona Lisa and rework the same panel for 4 years, you know. But I mean, you know, within reason, like just if you're making comics that look like they were made in 10 minutes and you're making them in 10 minutes, then that's, and you're like, why do my comics look like they're taking 10 minutes? That's the big trick. Like if you're making comics that look like they took an hour, and you're like, why do these keep looking like cheap comics that were made in an hour? It's because you're only spending an hour, right? So anyhow, just wanted to tack that on there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to switch. Oh, I don't know what you're going to say, Corey. But
No,
I was just going to suggest that we shift back over to Chase and have him explain a little bit of his process. Creating his comic and because I think we can learn a lot from, you know, because I mean, I don't know if you have those stacks available that you had before where you kind of show, but you've done a lot of work and your work has a lot of detail to it. So I know it didn't show up too well before just on the webcam, but even just to see the bulk of what you've already completed, it's pretty inspiring.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, it's pretty much 6 months of nonstop script writing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Roughly about 3 months for the first draft and another 3 months typing it out with revisions.
And how long will this comic be?
In terms of page length, I'm going for 200 at the least because I want it to be very lean, so it doesn't feel like it's I
mean, that looks to me when you're showing that, especially double sides, you must be really detailed because that looks like way more than a 200-page graphic novel from what you're showing me.
Originally, I wanted to be a script writer, so I wanted to write, you know, whole full-length films, and I found that comic book scripts are kind of a little too vague and boring for my liking, so I wrote it kind of like a movie script where the shots are very detailed in terms of you know, choreography and on-screen action and, you know, where the camera is placed and so forth.
Yeah,
and I'm trying to go about. Let me ask
this, Chase, because I mean, you're the writer and artist on this project. Now, I see the value, and I'm guilty of this too. I'll just put that right out there. But when you're writing for somebody else, it makes a lot of sense to put that detail in so they know what you're doing. But you're the one creating it. So what's the reasoning for putting that much detail in something that you ultimately in your head kind of know what you want?
Well, mentally, there can be a lot of editing that happens. So when you write something down and forget it and revisit the script, it's almost like you're getting this sort of part of your imagination from the past that, you know, you naturally would have gone through, you know, with everything else that has succeeded it. And I'm preferring to go about it with some degree of autonomy or improvisation, where the artist in me can kind of fall on those details if I'm resorting to any sort of, you know, problem solving, like any other way of telling the story or visualizing it. Like sometimes I might improvise something that would be better than what I wrote. And maybe I might have to return to the script and find the specifics to, you know, reorient myself as to, you know, how do I visualize it for the reader, you know, for their, you know, ease of navigating the story and so forth. There's kind of this valuable bit of advice that I got from Jim Rugg and Ed Piskor at the last Maui Comic-Con, where they wrote the advice to me that, you know, tricking your mind is almost kind of necessary in order to get through these, you know, longer assignments.
Yeah.
Like you have to completely go through that mental hurdle and just turn the brain off and simply work on it.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
And going.
I've joked with a lot of cartoonists, and I found that like I think they tend to have this same thing. I was even when we had David Chelsea on too. I was like, "Do you find this?" And he said this is like something he experiences too. Every time I'm sitting down to do a page, I'm like, "Yeah, this will be like an hour," and I'll live stream while I'm working sometimes, and it's become a bit on my live stream where I'm just like, "Yeah, this will probably take about like maybe an hour," and then it's like 4 a.m, and I started at 10. So it's like that there's something about the ability to kind of to have a realistic understanding like, and this will come with like work, to have a realistic understanding of what your real turnaround times are, because to be a professional artist you need to be able to give accurate deadlines, like you can't miss deadlines, but also to be able to have the ability to kind of like almost like just forget like how much labor it is each page, because you know, on a 200-page comic, it's like once you've gone through the labor of one page, you got to have something in your personality that can look at that page and be like, this is good, I'm going on to the next page, because it can be tempting to just be like, oh man, that took like, especially when you're starting, it's like that page took me a week. I don't know if I like that's 200 weeks. Like that's insane. So you have to like, you just kind of have to, yeah, I agree. I agree with I mean, Ed Piskor would be a really great example of somebody who I believe started young. I think he started working with like Harvey Pekar. And like the dude just went straight in. Like, I don't think he just waited. And I think that's actually a good point. There's just a point where you just have to like go, okay, I'm going to trust it and just go and do the work. That's great.
Yeah, I'm not bound by any specifics when it comes to timelines or a schedule, but I'm kind of falling back on the advice that I kind of discovered when I was screenwriting, in that one of my idols, Kurosawa, had this method where he would overcome stagnation or doubt or becoming too precious with the script by just writing 1 page a day and having that be the very minimum. So if he stuck to that minimum goal, over the course of 3 or 4 months he would have an entire full-length feature film script. And a
Yep.
page a day, that's like 365 pages if he wrote nonstop for a year. And with that inclination to just sit down and write, if you had the energy, you probably could go 2 or 3 or 4 pages extra if you had the energy and the drive. So I'm almost adopting that method. I think Gary also does a page a week for his comics, and that might be kind of a manageable goal for 4 years of just a page a week. That can yield 200 pages, and the graphic novel could materialize from there if I'm diligent enough and not too much of a perfectionist.
Yeah, I think that's great. I've been doing, like, I trained myself to do a panel a day. So that's always been my expectation, is at minimum, I'm going to do one panel, and rarely does it only result in one panel. It's just that if I'm having one of those days where I'm just like, man, I got home, I don't feel it at all. It's like, I still need to do a panel. And it's like working out, where it's like once you train yourself to have that expectation, if you miss it, like you just feel really crappy. Like you're like, oh man, now tomorrow I got to do 2 panels just to make up for that. And so I think that's really good advice. Corey, you like have pretty good self-discipline with projects too. And Scott, like, also for you, like, what's your kind of self-discipline? I want to hear your guys's trick. Like, do you guys have something like that?
My trick, like I said, I think my trick that I bring up all the time, I think I even brought it up this time, was just the fact that breaking, instead of creating the graphic novel, which is my goal, breaking it up into single issues, because there's a lot of people say, what's the point in making single issues today? And for me, it's just, again, it's just a benchmark to hit.
Yep.
And I don't, as much as you hear me pitch my comic book, I'm not really pitching it the way I would if once it's complete. Once this thing's complete and it's actually a trade, then I'm really seriously going to market it and really plan on making it really profitable and everything, getting it out there. Right now, it's just kind of like, I run a Kickstarter and I make enough to make my print run and I sell books and stuff, but it's not like I'm not supporting myself with Young and the Dead, that's for sure. But it's just getting these single issues done, and then once it's done, then I collect it, and then that ultimately that's the main goal, to have the finished story.
Yeah, that's a great method, like the taking a bigger project and breaking it down into little bite-sized chunks. Like, I think that's the big trick. I know, like, Corey and I have talked about graphic novels and stuff, and he's like, I don't know how, like, I don't know, Corey, you've mentioned, like, how do I sit with a project for that long? And I think that's part of the trick, is like, I'll be like, I need to get to like page 10. And then once I'm to page 10, I'm like, okay, I can do like 10 more pages. I'm never thinking about the whole, because if I think about the whole, like after I've thought about the whole in the structure, if I think about the whole, I'll just have a panic attack because it's just too much. But it's like if you break it down into bite-sized chunks, I think I've seen you do that with like animations all the time, Corey. Like
I'm not wondering how you do that. I just in my own work, I either need to be working on 3 different things at the same time, because it's kind of like reading books. I very seldom read one book at a time. I'm in the middle of multiple books as I'm kind of going through, and it's kind of like whatever the mood strikes at the time, and I'll burn through like an entire trilogy in like 3 weeks, just because I get really into it. But when it comes to projects, like the shorter form projects, and so I consider shorter projects to be anything that takes less than a couple weeks. Stick to the one thing and do it. But when it comes to like longer form stuff, if I don't take a break from that one thing, I burn out. And by a break, I don't mean, sit down and play video games or go watch, 3 seasons of a TV show and like not do anything. I mean, take a break and go make something else. And so there are times where even when I'm in the middle of like a longer project, like a 6-month long project or something like that, where I'll be like, I need a break, and I'll like design 3 t-shirts or something, like as a way of, giving myself a break. It's kind of like not so much as a break as it is like a change is as good as a rest.
Yeah.
And so anyway, as far as motivation goes, I used to self-medicate through this. Like I used to just not be okay unless I was producing something. Like literally I was not mentally great unless I had that kind of like constant drive and production kind of going on. And I've kind of shifted in the last year or so kind of into a more contented state. I don't think my production has slowed down.
Yeah.
Since I've done that, but I am allowing myself to enjoy the process more, and to kind of just be more present in making stuff, and just kind of enjoying the fact that like it's basically magic. I mean, it's alchemy what we can do. We're creating stuff that didn't exist out of, I mean, I can, as an artist, I can take a couple, very crude materials like some ink and some paper, and I can create whole universes that didn't exist before. And if that's not alchemy, I'm not sure what is. And so there's like this kind of magic to it that's really kind of fun. And if I screw up somebody's hand, or if I draw, somebody's left eye kind of weird or whatever, that sucks. But at the same time, like that whole thing didn't exist, 3 hours ago. And so there's kind of this cool experiential thing that I'm kind of moving into. But I still find I'm not okay when I'm not producing. But I just don't think I'm making stuff out of the fear of that anymore. I think I'm making stuff out of the love of it. So I'm running towards something rather than running away from something, I think.
Yeah, I'm coming around to that a little bit on this current project, where I even have been telling my wife, usually when I have to work on my comics, I'm just like, I got to do my blah, 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 or I got to work on. I have this kind of attitude of like, it's like this forced self-discipline thing. And this last project I was getting really excited about as I was working on it, and then I realized I actually like doing this. Like
Yeah.
I appreciate the fact that I have the time. Like I've developed the discipline to have the time to sit down and work. And then I also really appreciate the process. Like it is fun. And like you were saying, Corey, it's like magic. We're getting to make stories that didn't exist yet, you know? So I don't know, Chase, I think it just sounds like you have a really good approach to it, you know? So what do you,
Yeah, I'm
for you, what's the philosophical thing that you've hit out of curiosity?
well. The reasoning I want to go with a full length book is, I want to see how far I can reach, in
Yeah.
terms of leaving a memorable impression on the reader with a story that kind of stays in their mind for a long while after they've read it. Like I don't get that same sort of gratification with, say, a very short comic or zine, even though like you can really experiment with brevity in those kinds of assignments and small form projects. But I think with a full length book, I really want to create something that will prove not only my credence as a artist, but as a writer too. And I don't think many cartoonists really think of themselves as, authors that, write in images. Like it's a very select few that really kind of, think with that authorship in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that's the few and the proud, man. Anyhow, that's my favorite kind of cartoonist. Like, I feel like, to me, that's the definition. I know this is something that some people have not agreed with before, but to me, I think if someone calls themselves a cartoonist, I tend to think they write as well. Like, it doesn't mean they can't do, comics for other people or illustrate or collaborate with other people, but in general, I'm like, oh, you're like writing some stuff, you know? I feel like that's part of the cartoonist thing, But you're right; it's a rarer breed than just the hand moving for the dollar, Yeah,
I almost want to be perceived as like, I don't know, this seems like a very bloated comparison, but almost like how a lot of people feel about Bob Dylan, where they think his songwriting is actually more masterful and more proficient on a whole other level versus his actual singing and playing. Like,
mm-hmm.
there is that, aspiration to just kind of, transcend the form to a point where even the creator himself can't really match it in execution. Like I'm always striving with communicating what's, intangible in work. Like, if like I kind of got that feeling reading two stories where I just sort of felt the weight of, life possibly coming to an end in the middle, in the brink of a second, but that not happening because there's like this greater thing that's also happening in the protagonist's mind. Like there are those moments that you normally wouldn't think about in a comic book, but it has that power as a medium.
Yeah, I like to think it. It's I don't know. I mean, I think comics. I think we're all in agreement on this, but I think comics have a unique ability to kind of transcend the written word. Where there's something about that weird mix, right, of visuals and text, where it's just like it creates this like magical experience. Where if you can hit it right, and I feel like sometimes you kind of. And this is where Corey was dead on about where he was talking about what we're doing being magic. There is a part to this whole thing that we don't really have much control over, and I think that's another reason it's good to just commit and make the work, because at the end of the day, like if you have an epic in your head and then you're going to put it down on paper and it ends up that it just sucks, it doesn't connect with anyone. A comic that sucks and doesn't connect with anyone is a million times better than the comic in your head, right? It at least that's something tangible that can be shared with other people, and you made something a reality. I'm just saying, like, that's how I think of it for myself, because I fully go into these realizing hey, I could fail and these could suck. Like, it's and so I think, but here's the thing, if you succeed, how much better is that than just like the success in your head of a story, right? Where you actually made a real connection with somebody with a story. I think that's a really magic thing. So, and then Kayla said, my fear went from a fear of not producing to a fear of not producing something good enough. Hence the perfectionism question. It just went downhill fast. This is an interesting take on it all, though. Yeah, So Chase, okay, I'm going to ask you, because that brings up something interesting too. Where how do you balance? So it sounds like you kind of put a time limit where you're like, okay, I'm going to set like Gary's doing, where it's like a page a week or something like that. Aside from that, do you have any other tricks to kind of like, how do you kind of counterbalance, like, because obviously we have to be trying to make good things too. And part of making good things is like being aware that they could not be good and trying to make them better than like our first pass or whatever. How do you kind of overcome how do you do the seesaw of like not caring too little and not caring too much?
Very glad you presented this question because, in order to avoid the pitfall of fatigue or burnout or the process becoming lethargic and not fun anymore, again, it's going back to tricking the brain where, instead of just, thinking about working on the book, I think about tackling a 4 to 6 page chapter in the best way possible and almost treating that as sort of a short form project in and of itself.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, I had on the live stream with Gary, the little grocery list I made of chapters that I was most pumped to draw, like little moments that I was looking forward towards. Like I'm not drawing the book in sequence. I'm almost going for the, take where the wind goes approach, or if I feel inclined to draw like a big battle scene or like some cool, samurai duel, I'll do that first. Because, worrying about continuity in comics is sort of like perfectionism in itself. Unless if it's very blatant, like the colors completely changing, from panel to panel, willy-nilly. Like that's completely avoidable if you just kind of go in with the mindset that, this works for the story. This is crystal clear storytelling for the reader, It flows perfectly and has the right build-up from panel to panel. Like all of that is actually quite intuitive as well.
Yeah, that's true. And you're right in the sense of also that intuition is something that develops by doing. It rarely can do it. Like you could watch a million videos or whatever and never quite develop that intuition. The only way to develop it is by doing. So Kayla, there you go. Your way of overcoming the fear of, I don't know, we'd have to talk to you specifically about it. But to me, for me, the fear of perfectionism disappeared when I realized I have limited time span. And so I'm going to get older. So do I want to be like 10 years from now? Do I want, like, even now I think about this 10 years from now, like right now I'm on my third graphic novel. 10 years from now, do I want to be the guy with 3 graphic novels or with 2? Because if I do a third, then I'm closer to being that guy 10 years from now. If I wait for like 10 years, then 10 years from now, I'm going to have achieved what I've achieved so far. So I always keep that in mind. But I also think 10 years from now, I don't just want 3 graphic novels, right? I want 4 minimum in 10 years. So in order to do that, well, hell, I really got to get moving on this thing, right? That helps too. I don't know.
Well,
Chase,
I
sorry,
think
I cut you off.
I think another thing along those lines, when you're just talking about creating, whether you're doing long form, short form, or anything, I wouldn't worry about the fear. It's kind of like like in all of the kids' movies where they say, bravery isn't, not having fear. Bravery is doing something even though you're scared or whatever. Yep. And I just think like I got some really bad advice when I got started of you should like wait to make something until you're really good at it and then make something. And what I think is I wouldn't worry about anything, like just start making stuff. And if you're scared, that's fine. Like acknowledge it. I'm scared. Great. And then make stuff, right?
Yep.
Oh, I suck at drawing hands. That's fine. And then draw some hands. Like go out and do the stuff because it's in the doing, it's in the action where you actually can like actually get anything out of anything. And so like just being able to have like, have that go. And so like what Chase is saying, I think is perfect is like, like I'm gonna draw what page I want to draw, I'm gonna write the chapters I want to write, and like and there's you could easily give into like, other people saying, well, that's not the correct way to do it, and I do it this way, or and you're like, yeah, cool, you do your thing. I'm gonna do it this way.
Yep.
And like that's significantly better in every way possible than like freaking yourself out and not doing it. And so I would rather have people do it wrong, do it incorrectly, do it asymmetrically, do it out of sequence, do it with bad anatomy, do it like with whatever, and just do it. Like doing it is way better than freaking yourself out and not doing it for whatever reason that you're freaking yourself out.
Oh my gosh, that's just that reminds me of a little trick that I use for that too. At least early on in comics, I would specifically note things that brought me fear, and then I would write them into my comic.
Oh,
like I would think like, okay, I suck at like, of course, when I started, because I'm an illustration major, every illustration major I know likes drawing people, right? Hardly any. Maybe there's a few that like drawing cars, like, but it's like cars or people. So like most illustration majors, when it came to like backgrounds, I was like, oh crap, I don't want to draw backgrounds. I just do like black backgrounds or cheat my backgrounds. So I forced myself to do like establishing shots because I was like, that's probably at the time that was like the most intimidating thing, to draw was like, do I have to draw a cityscape? Oh man, that sounds like a nightmare. Okay, I have to draw a cityscape. So there's that too for like just tacking onto what Corey's saying. You can also use your fear as a guide of like stuff to just directly attack. Like don't let the fear consume you. Actually be like, hey, that fear is telling me I suck at drawing hands. I'm going to draw 50 hands. I'm afraid of drawing eyes. I'm going to draw 50 eyes. I'm afraid of drawing people foreshortened. I'm going to draw like 10, like, and you don't even have to like sketchbook exercises are okay. But I honestly think you'll learn more by just doing that in your comic. Just be like, okay, I suck at foreshortening. I'm going to write a page where I have to foreshorten a guy punching somebody or something. And then use it on your project. Because I think project-based learning is always better. It depends on the personality, but I tend to think project-based learning is the best. Anyhow, go ahead. Scott, you anything on that? Like on the fear thing and how you juggle the leaning too much to perfectionism versus, or being controlled by fear or ignoring fear? How do you kind of weigh those scales?
For me, who was it? Was it John Romita that talked about he was asked what his style is, and he said his style is whatever it takes to meet the deadline.
Yeah.
Oh, so I'm kind of, for me, that's, meeting deadlines is to me more important than perfect art.
Yep.
And I think again, there's exceptions and everything, and certain artists that may not subscribe to that just do amazing work, and but I think that philosophy would tend to help a lot of people in business.
Oh yeah,
want to make a living doing this. So yeah.
Oh yeah, in commercial art, dude, that's the thing. In commercial art, at least, unless you're a huge rock star, and even in those cases, quite often there's a reason people are hiring you as an artist,
right?
And usually that reason has a deadline, and if that deadline's missed, the entire purpose of the hiring was just negated. And so, yeah, I mean, again, maybe there are people out there that can blow a deadline, but don't blow deadlines. And if you are possibly going to blow a deadline with a client, you need to communicate that sooner rather than day of, right?
Exactly.
You blow a deadline and day of communicate, and it would be really tough to retain. At least for me, yeah, that would have been a really hard way to maintain a career.
Yeah, and
I,
here's the
I
thing:
also,
I was just gonna say, if you're a professional, your non-perfectionist thing that you don't think is that great, that you're just doing it at a deadline. For most people, it's probably like some of the best stuff they've ever seen. So,
yeah, and a lot of the stuff you're getting hired to do, something that they are incapable of doing. I also think along the lines, and this kind of bridges what we're talking about now in the original topic, but like being able to celebrate your successes.
Yes.
And I also think it is a success to even make anything. It could
I
be
just
the
did a video on
worst.
that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, is it this week? I haven't watched your video.
yeah. It's
this
the
week.
latest one,
Okay,
celebrating your
yeah.
wins. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I saw the thumbnail. I haven't watched that one yet. But like, it could be the worst pile of steaming dog meat that has ever hit the page, but it's still something that hit the page, and you're still better off than not have done it. So Chase, as you're working on this longer project, do you find yourself intentionally or unintentionally like celebrating milestones, or how do you maintain kind of that positive forward momentum?
Well, I think part of it is being meditative and monastic, as I mentioned, where you have to take gratitude, even if it is labor, even if it does take a long amount of time. Like there has to be a positivity towards accomplishing something versus just leaving it as an unwieldy attempt that you're perpetually beating yourself up for not working on at the moment. Like there's that desire for upward mobility, for credibility and even prestige, but it's mainly to tell myself that I can make a lasting spiritual document that will potentially outlive me. If the readers can kind of be on the same wavelength as I am, and getting caught up in the story. Like I'm almost coming up on 2 years since I wrote the plot synopsis that I based my first rough draft of the script on, and somehow the story hasn't really gone away at all. If anything, I'm always daydreaming about it, even if I'm not at the drawing board, or if I'm at the gym and going out with friends here and there, preserving a social life before it collapses. Also, communicating with other people regularly is a good way to have that energy
Oh yeah.
going, and remaining transparent and effervescent in communicating. This day-to-day discipline one is maintaining, pursuing such a big project, and just opening up in general. If there are doubts and moments of vulnerability, just express that candidly, because I don't know if you've ever mentioned Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art.
Oh
All
yeah.
the
But
time.
Yeah, we
the one
like
thing he
preach
keeps
that
harping
thing.
on, yeah, he always keeps harping up on the idea that the enemy of writing is resistance, and that can be applicable to so many other things, beyond just writing and art as well. Like
Oh yeah.
not opening up and being honest can be very detrimental. So regularly communicating with friends and artists as well, having them maybe read and offer input on how to make it even better. Not being bogged down by criticism, but just being very dogged with channeling it into giddy creative energy. Deflecting fear into that enthusiastic threshold. I mean, those are particularly key factors in not crashing entirely with a project of this magnitude.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm forgetting what this is from, but I think it's an old saying among soldiers where it's like, hey, a lack of fear isn't a good soldier, it's a dead soldier, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's there's a certain level of fear that's actually really healthy even in art, right? And again, it's like just learning how to kind of learn how to use it and to lean into it and to kind of let it guide you, but not let it control you, right? It's a tool. It's meant as a tool, not a it's definitely not meant to be our brain. It's just one little signal that we can use to kind of either ruin or move us forward, right? Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Chase, any final thoughts? We're coming up kind of on the 90-minute mark.
Oh, I was actually going to mention that I potentially may even create a documentary about, the process of making a graphic novel, because I came to the realization there's not that many about the subject.
Yeah.
Documentaries on comic books and cartoonists have existed. Like there's the wonderful Terry Zwigoff documentary on Robert Crumb, and there's Comic Book Confidential. There's that bonus DVD featurette on Dark Knight Returns, even though that's way long after the fact. But there's never been a documentary about a book as it's being made in the moment, in a very Werner Herzog-esque manner.
There's Man Bin, which is sort of kind of documentary style in a way too. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, and I, in passing, but I probably should check that out.
It's you'll as much as a process nerd you are, I think you'd love it. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I think that if there were more cartoonists that were, either vlogging or making a documentary about their book, that would make people less hesitant and sort of more open towards pursuing that if they can, visually see, what it's like from the day-to-day, month-to-month struggles and so forth.
Yep. I totally agree with you. This is another thing about like overcoming fear, but like one of the things that also helped me come to the conclusion to finally make a comic was going to the Masters of American Comics show when I was a young cartoonist, and seeing the actual guys that I admired for years, like their pages in person. There was something that both humbled me but also demystified it, because you'd see like whiteout and errors and mistakes and blue lines underneath, and you're like, oh, there's like a, and I know Corey gets a lot from that too, like where he'll like, he collects original pages, I think for a similar reason, to kind of be able to like, it's like a way to almost honor but also demystify the process. I don't know, Corey, if you have anything on that.
Yeah, I mean, like I have very, very few of my pages are pages that I saw in the comics first, but there are a couple pages where it was like, I've got to have that page. Like that is incredible. And the interesting thing about it is you get those pages and you see like that there's like a paste up, like that's kind of like cut over a mistake, and then there's like whiteout, and like like one of the artists that I'm going to have on the show. I mean, his pages are like thick with like whiteout, and he uses like so much whiteout that it's like ridiculous. But also just seeing like, like I've got a couple of Ryan Otley pages from Invincible that aren't inked, so I just have the penciled pages, and it's fascinating just looking at like, oh yeah, it's not like he just drew that building. You see this like very complex like grid that he had to lay down in red line, and then opposing grid and blue line, and you can see like that thing. I think that's one of the things that's super important too. I love that you're thinking about making a documentary about the content you're making, because I mean, like I think one of the pieces of content that I am most proud of is was a total failure. I set out to do an animated short in 100 days, and I every day I made a video about what happened that day, and I crashed and burned on that animated short. It did not happen, but I have 97 videos, like over 120 hours of me just, well, not all of them are an hour long, but I do have several that are multiple hours long of me just figuring stuff out. And there are like days and days and days and days in a row where it's just like, I fricking screwed it up again. I broke the rig again, you know? But like at the end of that, I had learned how to animate in After Effects. And I tell people that all the time. I'm like, go check that out. If you want to see what this is like. In 3 months, you could easily go from I don't know anything about this to proficient.
Yep.
You know, if you put in the time, and I believe that of almost anything, that you're pretty much only 2 or 3 months away from proficiency in any skill, especially in the arts.
Yeah, and I can attest to that. Like just knowing Corey, where I think we had started doing a lot of streaming a little bit after the 100 Days of Animation.
Mm-hmm.
And the progress from first off him starting that to finishing it, like he had a pretty solid understanding of it, but just the evolution from there to now, where I mean Corey can produce stuff as a one-man studio that I know studios in Los Angeles full of a lot of people that can't do it within the time frame or the skill level or quality that Corey brings, which is crazy. But I mean, it's possible, but it's also not possible with everyone, because Corey's also one of those weird guys who's like, he'll literally be like, I'm going to figure out how to build a desk. And then he like the next week is like, I built this desk. And I also learned the history of desks and how desks work. And like, you know, I decided to actually make it like a desk that turns into a robot. And anyhow, so, but yeah, that's a really, really fair point. And I think documentaries like that would be really fascinating and fun to watch, Chase, too. I think even for like seasoned guys in it, one thing you're probably learning this. A lot of younger cartoonists will learn this too. Not like we're old crazy cartoonists, but we're old dudes and we draw, you know. But I will say there is like a there's a point of real interest, I think, for people who've been at it for a while to like see newcomers like tackle their first graphic novel, because it brings back memories of that strange time where we all had to do that. And so it's like, I think that'll be really cool for not only for like new people, but also for people who've been at it for a while, just to be like, oh man, like it's kind of exciting and inspiring to see that active creation, you know. I think for everyone, honestly.
Yeah, and from a marketing angle, what better way to promote your book than with a documentary like that? Because some people will just, maybe they're not even, you know, crazy or that interested in the subject matter, will watch it because the process, and then once they see, who's not going to buy the book after they see your process creating it, you know?
Yeah. Especially if you, this is just a thing, but if you edit it so that you're kind of the underdog at the beginning and you kind of make it like root for the underdog kind of scenario, who will not want to watch? Like they're going to want to watch to be like, will he actually make it? Is he going to make the thing? He's going to make the thing. That's crazy. I can't believe he's making the thing. Right? I don't know.
Yeah.
At least you'll have us watching.
Yeah. Like, yeah. I don't know if any of you have seen American Movie, the late 90s documentary about the making of a Coven by, was it Mark Burchard or somebody? It's almost like Kevin Smith characters come to life.
Yeah, it's those two guys. Yeah, I can't remember if I've seen it. I'll watch movies and then later forget that I watched them, but I know my brother was recommending that movie, and I think I did watch it. Yeah.
I was just thinking there should be the comic book equivalent of, you know, that documentary, you know, where you're just seeing somebody struggle to make, you know, a single graphic novel, like how, you know, the two featured filmmakers in American Movie are struggling to make their own, you know, short feature. And you can kind of see all of the tools and, you know, accessories I'm using to make the graphic novel. I have an embarrassing confession to make. I don't really use top tier art supplies. I use Hello Kitty stationery for my graphic novel. I use Hello Kitty pencils.
Just don't use Sharpie to ink. Just don't use Sharpie to ink. That's all I ask.
All right. I do use microns.
Okay. All right.
But I think it would be kind of funny to know that, you know, a serious graphic novel, you know, was made with, you know, just the most unassuming, quaint materials imaginable.
I think that's the best. Honestly, I feel like on a material snob level, like first off, I think just to counter what Scott said, my first comics I did do was Sharpies, and then of course I learned, oh, you don't do comics with Sharpies because it's a pain in the butt. But
Well, not only that, but it's not light fast, and it will fade over time.
Oh yeah,
and it won't last. So.
Yeah, but there's
And
some
it
people who
reeks.
just have to do that. But still, if you need to, man, do them in crayons. I don't care if it looks cool. I think like the different material is fun. You know, I'd love to
Like,
see
imagine
a
if
crayon
Barry
comic.
Windsor Smith used, like, you know, the most unassuming of, you know, stationery, like, you know, a very readily available, you know, type branded pencils and so forth. That's also another thing I should mention about my book. It's not digital at all. It's all going to be 100% analog, traditional, you know, pen to paper.
Awesome.
That's
Well, if
cool.
you haven't already started filming, I mean, you've got a lot done. So you probably, I love the documentary idea. If you're not already filming some stuff, you definitely should. And don't shy away from showing those, like the painful moments where it's just like, I don't know if this is working. You know, this is not a good day. You definitely include that stuff. Be real. You know.
Yeah, one of the best docuseries that I watched was it was by I think it was Two Player Productions did a docuseries based on Double Fine Adventures creating a video game, and the pitch was a Kickstarter pitch, and they said, you know, either you're going to watch us make a video game or you're going to watch us you know, destroy ourselves in the process, and either way it's going to be a good time. And it was really interesting. In the middle of that documentary, like at the midpoint, they completely ran out of money as a company and had to like figure it out. They're like, what do we do? and that was one of the episodes was we spent 100% of the money at the 50% mark of the production of the video game. So where do we go from here? And it's a really fascinating. Anyway, I love that whole series. It's really good. It's free on YouTube if anybody wants to watch it. But yeah.
What's that called, Corey?
I don't know the name of the series, but it's Two Player Productions is the company that made it, and they made it about Tim Schafer's company, Double Fine Adventures.
Okay.
I'll see if I can find a link and send it to you. I got it as a reward tier for backing them years ago, and then after like a year, they're like, "Hey, do you guys care if we put this on YouTube?" And everybody was like, "Yeah, do it." And so it's available for free now. But it's pretty cool. It's a neat series. But it's just like anything else. Like I really do think people really enjoy watching magic happen, and I think creation is just magic. And sometimes it's messy and nasty and it hurts, and sometimes it's amazing and everything. And so yeah, I think that series would be super interesting.
Yeah.
I'd love to do it. And I mean, you can do it however you want, but I would push towards like releasing it more frequently rather than making it something that you know is also a long-term project. Like release it in little bits. I think that's pretty fascinating. And then you start gathering an audience as of people that are interested in the project that you're making over time. I mean, all three of us have kind of seen that happen with things that we've been working on and just kind of share the process of.
Yeah, I mean, it might be hard to rig up, but I also encourage like live streaming while you're working on a big graphic novel. It's surprisingly, this is the first time I've been like heavily doing that, like almost every time I'm working on it. And it's been surprisingly nice because I think there is the one hurdle, and I'm curious, Chase, maybe this is the monastic part of it, but one of the hardest parts about comics is it's very lonely. Like you're drawing a lot, all kind of quite often, you know, in a very isolated environment. So I think the live streaming component could be something to consider too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like documenting it on video would also be good for like social media, where it's like these little bite-sized clips of, you know, a page or a chapter being drawn.
Yep.
You know, and I don't know, doesn't have to be time lapse, but it could be like a very quick succession of cuts that's like compressing hours into seconds. So it's, literally the magic coming about because it's very instantaneous in the way it's presented. So there's almost like different media outlets to disperse the content, like a lot of old rope, as the expression goes,
Yeah.
repurposing the video aspect of covering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
I just think more people should be open about graphic novels getting made, not only for the demystification, but also to just sort of appreciate the labor that goes behind it. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen No Event Skyber's YouTube channel vlogs, but you're kind of seeing him experiment with different mustache styles as he's going about making his books. Like, there's that kind of fun aspect to, playing up the busy, introverted workaholic, cartoonist image with those kinds of videos. But I almost want to do the same thing with my own documentary, potentially.
I love it. I think that's perfect.
That's great. Well, good. Well, we're at an hour and 40 minutes. I think we should call it.
Yep.
Chase, we'll have to have you on another time. Let's do the rounds. Chase, where can people find your stuff and follow along with your documentary of the stuff that you're making?
Yes, I'm quite active on my social media, which is really only just my Instagram, Chase Tokutaro Art, all as one name. And as a matter of fact, I have a lot of copies of my zine left over that you can DM me if you want a signed special copy with a personalized thank you message. I'm more than happy to ship it along to you so you can boast about knowing me before I became mainstream, very punk, very underground. And my email address is chasetokutarart@gmail.com. And yeah, you can find me in those places.
And there's a link in the description of this video on YouTube to find Chase on Instagram. And Josh, feel free to wax eloquent in this. Where can we find your stuff?
Just go to joshuakemble.com. All my books are there. There's 2 stories, which is my graphic novel about faith and mental illness, which is out now. You can purchase it today. It's hand-lettered, handed to you. You can also pre-order Jacob's Apartment, which is my graphic novel about the questions that can shake even the strongest of faith, out from Graphic Mundi. And I'll also be at TCAF in Toronto. So if you want to find out about more live events or events where you can meet me and buy a copy of one of my books or get them signed or just have a conversation, check that out at live events or upcoming events on my website, joshuakemble.com.
Nice, Josh.
All right. I will get you to have succinct intros yet. You can find my stuff at CoreyKerr.com. And if you're interested in figuring out why I'm working on a crowd scene that has a Greek philosopher and a couple nerds and some New Yorkers with a samurai and some people, a raptor. This is part of an upcoming, yet to be announced comic that I'm working on.
Yes.
And
yes, we convinced you. You've turned to the dark side.
Everybody keeps acting like I abandoned comics. I just I took a little animation break for about 3 years. But anyway, I if you want to follow along with that, you can check me out at CoreyKerr.com. And if you go to CoreyKerr.com/online, then you can see Instagram and YouTube and Twitter. And very recently, as of like the last 24 hours, because some American oligarchs decided to buy Twitter, I am experimenting with some stuff. So if you want to experiment with me and go check out Mastodon, which is a decentralized open source based kind of Twitter variant that's not owned by corporations, with no ads and things, and a chronological timeline that does not have the algorithm trying to manipulate you into becoming addicted to the platform. That link is also in the description of this video. Scott, where can we find your stuff?
You can find my stuff at circworks.com. You can also find my videos on my YouTube channel, Circworks on YouTube. Like Corey said, Corey was talking about, the last video I put up was all about just celebrating your wins. But there's tons of other videos if you just want to learn. If you want art, advice, or inspiration, a lot of it having to do with comics, just to check out my YouTube channel. There's tons of stuff there. And last but not least, I want to talk about our newsletter that we have for this show, the Artcasters, because the way we do this show, we do it every single week, but it's not on one channel. This week it's on Corey's channel. Next week it'll be on my channel. Then it'll be on Josh's channel. And it's not, typically it's on Thursdays, but not obviously today. It's on a Wednesday. So it can get a little confusing, but to help alleviate all that confusion, we've got a mailing list. If you join that mailing list, we will send out usually at least 30 minutes ahead of time a link where you can find us. It'll tell you who the guest is going to be, what day, all that stuff, because YouTube doesn't always alert people when we go live. So there's a link in the description to join that mailing list, and we don't spam you or anything like that. It's only to send you that a link and alert you guys when we're going to go live.
Cool. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure that you do all the things to let the algorithm know that you like this video, and we will see you guys in a week.